Hello everyone, this is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. If you are looking for vendor process training for you or your entire vendor team, head over to my site at deborahrrichardson.com and click on the Vendor Team Training Solved button to learn more about what is included in the monthly or annual plan and also to download a 2021 training schedule. Get the training that you and your team needs to avoid payment fraud, duplicate vendors, compliance fines, and more. So if your vendor team or accounts payable help desk is still taking calls from vendors, well, I have some information to help you, and that includes some 2021 updates because we know there have been changes since the pandemic. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 145. Is your accounts payable team still taking phone calls from vendors? Updated for 2021. The human voice, the oldest and most effective interaction, is being used by cybercriminals or phishers to solicit sensitive information via live phone calls. Now, this social engineering tactic is sometimes called vishing, where emotional triggers, a sense of urgency, etc., are used to play on our human vulnerabilities. Now, combine that with the user, in this case, the AP help desk member or customer service team member being the weakest link in any security system, and a basis for really eliminating those live phone calls can be made. Now, the rise of scams with the pandemic in 2020 increased fraud in accounts payable, as with most functions, and the phones are really being targeted. I posted a new scam alert in 2020 from both the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, and the Cybercriminal or Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agencies, CISA, and they warned against an increase of vishing, which is, again, phone phishing, since the start of the company's working from home. They found that in mid-July of 2020, a vishing campaign was reported that targeted employees, VPN credentials, and even spoofed phone numbers of colleagues and other employees at these companies to appear legitimate. Now, I posted another new scam alert in 2020 where SC Magazine posted about how cyber criminals are using a combination of email or phishing and phone vishing as a two-pronged attack to businesses. In IOFM's Benchmarks Accounts Payable Customer Service from November 2013, it was not a question of whether accounts payable teams were taking live phone calls, but rather how many FTEs, which team members the calls were routed to, how many were vendors versus employees, that type of thing. Now, fast forward to May 2018, where a question about AP customer service efficiency to the IOFM's advisory panelists met with responses revealing a trend toward eliminating phone calls in favor of vendor portals, CRM tools, email, and ticketing systems. Now, fast forward to 2021, and AP teams are being targeted even more every day by cyber criminals, and that question still remains. So if your AP team is still taking calls, you want to make sure to have techniques in place that can authenticate the callers. Now, I do have 5 different recommendations for this process. So let's start with the first one. One is to authenticate each external call, whether they are a vendor or an employee, before discussing any invoice or vendor account information. You want to require that the vendor provide at least 2 pieces of information that a fraudster would not know, such as an invoice number and maybe the last 4 digits of any bank account number on file, or the last 4 digits of the tax ID, something that would not also be on the same document. So you wouldn't want to ask for an invoice number and an invoice date, because that will be on an invoice, and if a fraudster gets a hold of that, then they can authenticate. Now, for the employee, you want to require that they provide 2 pieces of information, such as their cubicle number or their next level up. Just make sure it's something that the AP Help Desk or customer service team has access to look up and verify, maybe on your something that's included on your intranet. Now, if the AP team member, customer service team member, or help desk team member is suspicious, they can try this vendor tactic. Now, according to social-engineer.org, if you ask the suspected visher for their name, company, and phone number, or even just put them on hold, the visher will disconnect. So if the help desk member is uncomfortable in any way, they can take the caller's information, tell them someone will call them back, and if they actually give identifying information, it can be validated or handed over to leadership and or the security team. Now, the second tip is to give the AP team members a reference for authentication. Now, the reference makes it easier for AP team members to remember what information can be used to authenticate the caller. It is helpful if different combinations of elements can be used to authenticate. So now all they have to do is pick and choose, maybe from different columns. Also, it can increase the potential that the AP team members will actually comply with the policy. Don't forget to include a short script to be used to explain the reason for the authentication and how to end the call when the authentication is not successful. Now, this reference should be treated as confidential, and it's not to be shared with anyone outside of the AP team. Now, the third one is to really monitor to ensure authentication is being followed. Listen randomly in supervisory mode if your phone system has that feature, or consider recording calls and auditing those weekly. Follow up with team members as necessary and include in the performance reviews or their performance reviews if possible. This is one area where it may be done in the beginning. However, as time passes, or even during busy times like month end or year end, it's easy for the AP team member to just skip to increase productivity. So make sure that you put this monitoring in place, because what is measured improves. Now, the fourth one is to limit information revealed. So even when the vendor or employee authenticates, still limit the information that the help desk or customer service AP team member can give over the phone. You want to separate the information that can be given over the phone and what information can only be confirmed. So have a set for what can be given versus what can only be confirmed. So for example, if a vendor wants to verify which bank account their payment went to, have them give you the bank account number, and you can confirm whether it is what is on file for that vendor. Also, don't reveal any information that is used to authenticate the vendor. Now, the last one, number 5, is to send a vendor confirmation. So if any information is updated in the vendor master file, have a means to notify the vendor using the previous information prior to the update. So if the email was updated, send the notification to the previous email, letting the vendor know that there was a change on the account. Now, include in the notification the reply to information for your team in case the change was not initiated by the vendor. A quick note on this one, supporting documentation should be required for any change to the vendor master file. However, there are those times where remittance email address has been fat fingered or not been added, and the vendor is calling to into the help desk to get remittance information. So anytime that information is updated on the vendor master file from that phone call, and this should really be a rare occasion, you need to make sure that you send vendor confirmation. And I actually recommend that you send that vendor confirmation when any change is made from any type of method. So if they send it an email, if they send you something via regular mail, if you get something faxed in or something dropped off on your desk, just make sure anytime that vendor master file record is touched and updated that the vendor is notified. All right, so phishing is a big thing. I actually did have it as one of the top 3 fraud risks of 2021. But if you want to stay up to date with fraud trends, you really need to have a way to do that on a regular basis. And if you would like, I do have weekly training for your vendor team, including new frauds and how to combat them. And you can sign up for the Vendor Process Team Training Pass. I'll leave the link to the blog post. So you'll be able to click through to that blog post in the show notes for this podcast. Now, the 4th Thursday of every month is fraud training, and I go over all of the new scam alerts along with how your team can combat that. So make sure you check that out. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 145th episode of Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.